where you go after class when you have to do some homework, maybe after work to break up the monotony of the day, or maybe on the weekend to get some reading done. Today, you have a big conference call, and so you head out to your favorite spot. But today is different. It's taken. And not only is this spot taken, but every spot in the space is taken. Something you'd love to have known before you set out on your journey to get to that conference call. But you're not alone in facing this problem. A lot of people are facing this problem across the country. And you're part of this group called a nomadic worker. Someone who spends the majority of their time doing work outside of their home or workspace. Spaces like Starbucks, a very public, very common cafe. Workshop Cafe, a kind of new age productivity-focused cafe that takes reservations. 1871 and other co-working spaces that are membership-only, very exclusive places to get work done. And then, of course, your public libraries and your community centers as well. All of these spaces, you'll see people just popping up and doing work there. And I set out and I wanted to talk to these people and understand that process, understand that journey. And some of the things I started to find were people were valuing those seats over the service they were receiving. The best way to illustrate that, Sarah actually goes to a different Starbucks on Dempster that's smaller and further away from her house and campus, just so she can get a seat. Service comes second in this interaction. She really wants that table. After that, after you frequent a space, you get to learn information about that space. You become an expert. Amy avoids the after lunch and after dinner rushes, something that we might not think about when we're first going to a space. And finally, there's this inefficient use of space. Groups tend to avoid. It's just too hard to get a space, and all the spaces that were intended for groups are taken by that one person with a backpack. Brad says he never schedules group meetings at Starbucks just because he knows there's not going to be seats together. And so I took all these insights and all my learnings through this process, and I formed a point of view. How might we give nomadic workers knowledge about the availability of the third spaces around them? Well, how do other industries do it? First thing that came to my mind, parking garages. This is something you've probably seen before. They're popping up all over the country. They put sensors on every spot, and they track what's available and what's not. They allow you to see from a distance what's available, and even before you enter a parking garage, you can see the level availability of different parking garages. So you can better make your decision before you enter the parking garage. So I said, why can't we do this for these spaces? Why can't we do this for a desk? And so I tried it out. As you can see, I have a similar sensor that illustrates whether a space is taken or not. So after I had that in hand, I wanted to know what the market was doing. There's a company called Azure Software that does similar seat tracking with sensors under the table and logs this data for space utilization analytics for big office companies. They want to know exactly where in their office is being utilized, what's not being utilized, and it's a big, big money decision. Google Maps actually just entered this space over the summer and sent me into a frenzy. I don't know if you guys seen this card, but this little guy right here was added this summer and tells you the relative popularity of your spaces. You can see what are the peaks and the valleys of attendance of these spaces. Density is a new startup in this space that specializes in tracking the flow in and out of a space. They have these little trackers they put on doorways, and they give you real-time information about how busy a doorway is, thus giving you a proxy to how busy that space is. And finally, there's Retail Next. They take data from all sorts of avenues, and they create a space optimization plan for their retailers. So retailers know exactly where their customers are going, what they're doing, and how to better serve them. And so with these 4 standards of excellence, I set out what I wanted SWEETSPOT to represent. I wanted space optimization, real-time tracking, seat tracking, and a consumer-facing product. And so I set out to create that. And here's what the interaction looks like. Melissa's in class, kind of getting antsy towards the end of the class. She has about 2 hours to kill before her 4 p.m. class, and she wants to get some work done. So she pulls out her app. she sees at the top of the list there's a Starbucks on Campus Drive, which is actually the Norris Starbucks, and she's been there before, and she sees there's seats available. And so she says, great, my decision's made. I'm going to head there. She puts away her phone and heads out the door. As she closes in on the Norris Starbucks, she pulls out the app again, but this time for a different reason. She clicks on the card and then goes straight to the floor plan and sees the availability of every seat in that space. She sees in the top right corner there are seats available at those 2 tables. And she's been here before. She knows those 2 tables as prime real estate. You have a good view, it's very comfy, and it's isolated, yet not too isolated. Here you can see she sits down and she's happy, straight to work. And you can also see in the top right that that space has now been marked as occupied in the app. Now that was my idea, but an idea is just an idea until you test. And so what I set out to do was gather everybody I knew and tell them about a test I wanted to run. I was going to sit in Starbucks for 3 hours and ask people to message me for requests about the availability of the Norris Starbucks. And I would send them back screens of the availability. This is what that looked like. Now over the course of the 3 hours, I created a bunch of these screens, kind of walking around with my laptop, left-clicking everything and changing the color. During that process, I tried to interview during and after the process to see more about what they thought about being a nomadic worker and how SWEETSPOT integrated into that process. And here are some of the things I learned. People wanted to know about the noise level of these spaces. Sure, it's one thing to know how crowded it is, but a library being crowded and a Starbucks being crowded are different levels of noise. I learned the consequences of ignoring objects. And what I mean by that is my sensors track heat. I wanted to track people, not backpacks. But I started to understand what consequences that created when I had to mark seats available that were actually covered with backpacks and jackets by someone who had just gone out of the bathroom. And then there's this effect of unfamiliarity. People who had never been to the Norris Starbucks before were coming and using my app and checking it out. But once they got there, it was kind of jarring for them because they didn't really understand the space that well. And so this is another field where I would love to expand and give more people information about making their decision before they leave their house. So what's next for SWEETSPOT? I've been talking to you about consumers and getting real-time information to those consumers, but there's a whole other industry. There's the businesses those consumers are frequenting and getting deep analytics to those businesses. But don't take it from me. Dan, the assistant director of Norris, says we always need to justify what we're doing. This would not only help inform purchases and decisions, but also is this table even being used? Norris is really, really deep into analytics. It's something I found out during this interview. They track doorways in and out, they track purchases, and they have all other proxies of metrics that allow them to understand what their customers are doing. But this would just be one step closer to fully understanding the experience a customer has when they walk into the space. It's something they're dying to have. And so, thank you. That's SWEETSPOT.